What's up, everybody? Guy here. Quick little impromptu Friday afternoon. Pete Thamel just reported that Kalen DeBoer is leaving Washington for Alabama, that he's about to tell his team. It's live. This is 12:24 Pacific time on Friday. There have been a lot of stories already today, a lot of reports that he was about to leave. He was preparing to leave. He was negotiating to leave. It was a little weird how it slowly filtered out, but no surprise that in the end he is leaving. I didn't expect this a week ago. I did expect him to potentially leave. I didn't expect it to be for Alabama, but once Saban left, we knew that DeBoer would have to be on a short list. It's a really interesting hire, and I don't think we'll ever really know. People will report one thing or the other. After coaching searches, everybody wants to write their own narrative, right? Oregon wants you to believe. Dan Lanning wants you to know. He could have taken the job, didn't. Mike Norvell wants you to know. Florida State wants you to know he could have taken the job, didn't. Now, that said, I do think it's reasonable to think that Lanning would have been, I think, number one on that list. I think he made a lot of sense for Alabama, and I think Oregon's really lucky to keep him. I'm not surprised that Kalen DeBoer, as someone at Washington texted me today, we have a 7-year, $9.4 million per year deal on the table. But also this person understood, like, if Alabama comes calling, how do you not take that deal? So that's what Washington, last I heard, which was 15 minutes ago, they had a deal worth $9.4 million on the table for him. We haven't seen the Alabama numbers yet. Obviously, it's going to be more than that. You'd expect. Mike Norvell's getting $10 million at Florida State. This is a guy that went 104-12. That's his head coaching record. And I think one thing that he's always done up until he got to Washington, I went to Fresno State. That's my alma mater. I cover the Pac-12, cover Washington. So I've seen a lot of Kalen DeBoer. Of course, he had really good Big Ten offenses when he was the offensive coordinator at Indiana. What's interesting about him, up until he got to UW, he'd always kind of been places where you have to win with less. You're not going to be the biggest, the baddest from a financial resource standpoint. And those are always, I think, really attractive coaches, guys who understand what it takes, guys who have, the cliche, they've done the laundry. And then when you give them more, like you had at UW, like you had at Washington, then they can make more with it. The question is, the number one question with him is not, can he coach football? He is an offensive genius. He can score points. He can scheme. Can they recruit? Right now, 36th in recruiting at Washington. That Washington 2024 class was 10th in the Big Ten. Their portal class was 7th. So what does that mean? It means the staff is going to be critically important. Finding people who can recruit. And it's going to be critically important that Kalen DeBoer commits to recruiting in a way that you have to in the SEC. Now, over the years, I've debated a lot, especially with John, about how much does it matter where you're from when you go to a place. I think some places it matters more than others for a recruiting standpoint. Like, I think Lincoln Riley, as an example, a guy that recruited nationally, going to LA and going to SC, I think it mattered less for him. But I think for Kalen DeBoer, it matters a ton, right? He'd only been at Washington 2 years. Whether he's from the South or not, he does not have a deep, storied history of recruiting this part of the country. That's a huge deal. And you don't get a lot of leeway at Alabama. You don't get a lot of safety net. You don't get a lot of, okay, 9 wins, but next year it'll be better. You don't get much of that. The other thing is, when he got to Washington, they were coming off a 4-8 disaster season. He brought with him a quarterback in Michael Penix, who was able to implement everything and help him be kind of the coach on the field. He's taken over a very different program in Alabama, guys who had just won, guys who know what it looks like. And so he walks into a very different room. UW walk into a room of desperation, a room of guys begging somebody to show them the way, begging somebody to get the most out of them, hoping, it turned out they were talented, hoping the next coach would know how to help them reach their potential. And Kalen DeBoer did. That's a different room than the room he walks in at Alabama. Those guys all arrived at Alabama because Nick Saban sat them down in their living rooms and promised them, not told them, promised them, if you come here, you are going to play for a national championship. And he told no lies. It was a promise that he kept. And now Kalen DeBoer is going to say, now look, now this is where, he does have a leg to stand on. He's like, look, guys, I just played for the national championship. Now they're going to go, well, we almost beat that Michigan team. We kind of hung in with them. You guys, how'd you guys do early? Now, as it stands, like following a legend, right? You see a lot of people say that the last few days. No, you don't want to be the one that has to follow Nick Saban. I don't think coaches necessarily care too much about that. They want to know they're going to have the resources and how much more likely are they to win a championship at this place than at their place. And if you're Mike Norvell, or if you're Dan Lanning, you're like, I got the resources. Mike Norvell thinks he could have won a championship already. Dan Lanning, I think, thinks in the expanded playoff he's going to have a great shot. And I think Dan Lanning's right about that. Now that the playoff is expanding, it does open the door for more teams. I think what's unique about Washington, who just went to the national championship game. So on one hand, you could say, yeah, they proved they can do it. It'll be interesting what level of money they were willing to commit, like really at the biggest levels, right? They're going to the Big Ten, but they're going to the Big Ten with much less of a cut of the pie than the other fully funded Big Ten members. When I say fully funded, I just mean Big Ten members that are getting a full cut. When Oregon and Washington came into the Big Ten or announced they'd go to the Big Ten, they got less money than USC and UCLA. Now, eventually they're going to get the full money. But from the jump, they don't have the full money. And there's been some debate about this. Everything I've heard over the last couple of years is that at Washington, they don't have the full war chest and it's part of why they went to the Big Ten, that lets them do whatever it takes, anything it takes. Now, maybe that's changing. New athletics director there. Jen Cohen went to USC. Troy Dannon comes in. And part of what his big job is going to be at UW is to take every success that they just had, a national championship run, my voice not 100%, sorry about that, and convert it to money. Like convert it to dollars, convert it to donations, convert it to NIL, convert it to recruiting, convert it to coaching salaries, convert it to a world where you don't have to decide, are we giving our offensive coordinator a raise or are we changing our basketball coach? Right at the highest level, you can do all of those things. Buyouts be damned. And everything I'd heard over the last couple, someone yesterday, no, Washington, they're funding NIL and all that stuff at the highest levels. But everything I'd heard was that wasn't the case. Not because they don't want to, but because from a fundraising standpoint, they just haven't been able to generate the funds in the same way. Oregon has a lot going for it, but the number one thing Oregon has going for it is Phil Knight. So, does Ryan Grubb become the next coach? I think that's an easy automatic hire. Remember, Ryan Grubb has been with Kalen every step of the way, all the way back to their NAIA days. But Ryan Grubb last year chose to stay at Washington over, do you remember what school it was over? It was over Alabama. Nick Saban tried to hire Grubb to be the offensive coordinator at Alabama last year. So by the time you watch this, if you're watching this later in the day, Friday or maybe Saturday, maybe you know what happens. Maybe Ryan Grubb's been announced as Washington's coach. I think Jed Fish, who has done an incredible job at Arizona, undeniably fantastic job at Arizona, would have to be very high on this list. Jimmy Sexton's work is not done. The second that Kalen DeBoer signs the contract at Alabama, he's got more pieces on the chessboard out there to move around. So I would think Jed's a major candidate for the Washington job. He'd be a fit for the job, West Coast. People have suggested, would Pete Carroll want to come back to college? Pete is an outside the box guy. You don't see a lot of NFL guys. I don't think of the NFL guys who willingly go to college right now. Pete would rather, I think, wait and see what happens with the Chargers and that sort of thing. What's going to happen with Michigan? That's still undecided. I thought Kalen was going to be the prime candidate for the Michigan job. I don't blame him, by the way, for taking this job. Alabama is the top of the mountain. You want to find out if you can do it. You're more driven by your belief in yourself and your optimism that you can do it than you are driven by the fear of what it must be like to follow Saban. I respect that. I really do respect that, right? Like, okay, uh, everyone else is telling me you don't want to be the one to follow Nick. Well, let's find out. But understanding that's a major challenge. The other thing I think about this job, a couple other things. One, feels like a referendum on Lane Kiffin. Like, this feels like a pretty major moment in Lane Kiffin's career. The fact that he's been in the SEC, he succeeded in the SEC. All the rumors are all that he's kind of ready to move on to his next job because there just is a ceiling. You're just not going to win a national championship at Ole Miss. There's a ceiling on that job, and he's just about reached it. And it does not appear like he was anywhere near this Alabama job. Doesn't feel like it. And that would cause and Jimmy Sexton's his agent. So I think that would have to cause some. I thought Lane would be perfect for this job, by the way. So I'm not anti-Lane. I was pro Lane, but for whatever reason, Alabama didn't agree, and that's pretty telling. So I don't know if there's some, if it's mostly personality based. I would think it's got to be because he checks a lot of boxes, and maybe the fact that he was there before works against him, not for him, based on relationships. I don't know. But he seemed to me to be a pretty perfect candidate for that job. Like, Sark was not. And the reason Sark was not is because Sark's coaching Texas. Texas. You don't leave. No one leaves Texas for a step up. You get all the money you need. Is there a lot of pressure? Yes. Are there a lot of cooks in the kitchen? Sure. But you think it's any different in Alabama following Nick Saban? Hell, Nick Saban's keeping his office. So you're going to hear this, and I've already seen some of this, like, well, it's going to be a positive. If you're Kalen, Saban's going to be around, and he's going to help you, guide you. That's not what most coaches want. Most coaches who have reached this level of success don't think they need somebody there to hold their hand. So I'd be surprised. Now, maybe that was part of the deal. Maybe that's what kept others away. We'll find out here in the next few days. It'll be a little while before we found out exactly how much Nick's really involved, right? Pete Carroll's got an advisor role with the Seahawks. But if you watch his press conference, as I did, it means nothing. He has no idea what it means. It's just it's a soft landing if you need it, but it's not a promise of anything other than, well, we'll keep you around if we want. If you want. By the way, brought to you by Tito's Handmade Vodka. Crafted to be savored responsibly. Tito's Handmade Vodka. Tito's toast to Kalen DeBoer. Jonathan Smith, the Oregon State coach, formerly, now the Michigan State coach. Would he have just stepped right into this job if he hadn't been the Michigan State coach? Different athletics director, so there's no guarantee. But it would have felt like a really good fit. I don't know if he would have rather had this job because still he's got full Big Ten money behind him. It'll be a few years before Washington has full Big Ten money behind it. But the contract that they just offered that was on the table for Kalen DeBoer, 7 years, $9.4 million per year, pre-bonuses. That's $10 million more overall than the $52-ish million deal that Jonathan Smith signed at Michigan State. Remember, he was the offensive coordinator at Washington under Chris Peterson when they went to the college football playoff. So he would have been an obvious choice here. Does he regret it? Does he regret Michigan State? I don't know. I wouldn't be so sure that he does because, again, I think that program has shown, for better or worse, they're willing to really step up financially if they have to. And they gave Mel Tucker $90 million. They didn't have to. Now they're trying to get out of it. But that would have been an obvious hire. So it'll be, I would think the first move here is Ryan Grubb, but maybe, Grubb and DeBoer have been together a long time. Would he go with them? If he's ever going to not go with them, you would think it would be to just stay and become the head coach at Washington. Feels like an obvious fit. But either way, you gotta step up the recruiting. UW's gonna have to step up the recruiting. And for DeBoer, this is where what I said earlier about the staff, I didn't finish that thought. The staff's going to be critical. So people are going to be like, well, Saban can stick around and help you pick the staff, that sort of thing. Staff's going to be critical from a recruiting standpoint. Because he does not have the 2 years at Washington, 2 years at Fresno State. The thing he doesn't have is the evidence that he can recruit at an SEC championship level. Didn't even really have it at Washington yet. A lot of players left over. Now he brought some really key players in, transfers. But Penix was his guy going back to Indiana. So that's something he's going to have to prove. I think it'll be the biggest question for him. It'll be the number one criticism of it. And we'll find out as his staff comes together how much they're really willing to address it. Question from Jamal. Do you think Dabo was a real possibility for that job? Seems like he might be Clemson till he's done. Dabo played at Alabama, coached at Alabama. It's the only other place he's coached. I said this the other day when Saban retired. If this was 3-4 years ago, Dabo would have been the obvious hire. Dabo was no longer the obvious hire. Dabo seemed like he was he's closer to retirement than he is to his next level. I mean, because he seems annoyed all the time. This is the thing with Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning is all in on what college football requires. There's not a college football coach on earth that would prefer college football's offseason schedule to the NFL's. All these guys would. The NFL, you don't spend all this time recruiting. You're not FaceTiming 17-year-olds, right? But one thing about Lanning as an example, and yesterday was a good example of this, he does not give off any vibe of like, I don't like this. This sucks. This is draining. He seems happy to be here being college football. He seems really happy to be here. Dabo does not seem happy to be here. So Dabo would be a weird hire from that standpoint. Dabo seems like he's about to say, forget this. So from that standpoint, I don't think Dabo was close, but I don't think it was necessarily because Dabo didn't want it. Maybe he didn't. But I think it was more so Alabama understood that they need somebody willing to go to work. If you're going to replace Nick Saban, you got to be neck deep in this whole thing. And Dabo doesn't feel like he is. It is a good day to be a Duck. You kept your guy. The guy that beats your guy's gone. I mean, one of the arguments for Kalen would be if people at Alabama are like, well, we wanted Lanning. Kalen would be like, I'm 3-0 against him. Yeah, we wanted Sark. Yeah, I'm 2-0 against him. So he's been a very good big game coach. He is a very good coach. The only question with this is recruiting, and the staff is they're going to have to address that with the staff. So, one thing, it was interesting. Pete Carroll, I thought, had a great line in his press conference. They asked him about they asked him about head coach and GM relationships. And he said, I see all these people, they try to take this superstar over here and this superstar over here and put them together and hope it works. And maybe it'll work, but it probably won't. It's hard to just smash people together who don't have relationships and say, okay, you guys are partners now. And that's partly what happens here, right? When Jimmy Sexton's your agent, power agent, Kalen DeBoer's agent, they get you a big job. They're gonna put him together with a coaching staff that isn't necessarily his guys, because that's what they have to do. It's what he's going to have to do in order to quickly establish relationships in Alabama, high school coaches throughout Texas, high school coaches throughout Florida, right? You're going to have to do it by adding staff members who already have. You buy those relationships, quote unquote, by hiring staff members who have those relationships. But what can happen sometimes is you see a coach turn his staff over after year one if it doesn't go well, because you just kind of stick these guys together and hope that it works. And it's your best shot at making it work. You can't walk in there with people without relationships who aren't willing to go neck deep throughout. You just don't have enough time. The portal moves too fast. The recruiting schedule moves too fast. This job is too high pressure to spend 2 or 3 years building relationships. So you gotta do it that way. And when you have Jimmy Sexton, he's gonna place assistant coaches on that staff with him. And it's gonna be up to him and up to them. Like, are you guys here to work? Are you really here to work together and go all in together? If not, it blows up. So, Kalen has a really good track record. He's got a very good reputation of working with others, of kind of building a good environment, of not losing, that kind of NAIA old school guy that he is. He hasn't lost that. Well, he's going to need that. That's the strength of his. He's going to need it. He's going to need it because his staff is going to have some people on it that he doesn't really know. Because that's the way it's got to be. Super chat Lanning looked fired up. 10 toes down, he said. Yeah, I watched him on McAfee. He's got great energy, man. Unlike me today. I just sound bad. I feel good. Sound bad. Took a little nighttime, cough syrup, whatever. I feel 100%. The only thing is I took a little of that nighttime stuff at 4 a.m. And so I've been floating all day. I'm not going to lie. I've been floating a little bit today. Still am a little. I've been hydrating, but I've been floating just a little bit today. Bam or Oregon? Who wins the Natty first? Oof. I mean, I'd have to. I don't know a ton about Alabama's roster other than what we've seen here recently. I would guess it's pretty stacked. One parallel that DeBoer has here. He walked in while he didn't recruit all this whole roster, he did have to walk in and say, "Trust me, guys, stay." And that big time receiving core, maybe the best receiving core they had in the country, they were all portal guys. They were all going in the portal when DeBoer got hired after Jimmy Lake got fired. And DeBoer walked in and said, "Roma Dunze, here's how we're going to use you. Jalen Polk, here's how we're going to use you. Jalen McMillan, here's how we're going to use you." He had all the film ready, and he showed those guys, here is how we're going to use you. So his first recruiting job is going to be player retention at Alabama. And, that's part of what Saban is sticking around to do. So I actually think Alabama is going to have a chance to win the national championship this year, 2024. They're going to have a shot. Because my guess is that they retain players and that Saban's a part of that and that the collective's a part of that. They are a pretty aligned machine. And because he's an excellent coach, I think they're going to have a chance to win a championship. So I'm going to say Alabama on that. I think Lanning does have a chance also. Lanning is recruited at a very high level. They need a quarterback. And so far, programs that transition to a new league, it's been a challenge. So we'll see Oregon stepping into the Big Ten right away, how much of a challenge it's going to be. Because I think Alabama could win a championship next year, I'm going to answer that question with Alabama. Disbanded Brotherhood. Bama fans are having a hard time processing this hire. What hire would have made them happy? Honest question. I understand. If I was a fan of a program that just lost Nick Saban, I would hate probably every other option. I would have hated Sark, would have hated Dabo, would have hated Norvell, and I'd hate them all. I would. So I don't blame them. There's not a hire they could make that would, if you're losing Saban, there's not a hire you can make that would fire you up. This guy can coach ball, though. A lot wanted Kiffin. Yeah, see, that's the one. I stand corrected because that's the one he was number one on my list for them in terms of fit, him or Lanning. And I would have thought that would have been the hire, Nike and Lanning. Do you think DeBoer raises Milroe's ceiling? I think he's going portal. And, that's the other thing. Oh, I just thought of that. What do you do? Will Rogers, the third, Mississippi State. he portaled over to UW. He was lined up to be their quarterback next year. So if Ryan Grubb stays, then maybe if you're Will Rogers, you're like, all right, school already started. I guess you stay. But if you're him, you came to play for this guy and Ryan Grubb. So I think if Ryan Grubb's the head coach, my guess would be Will Rogers stays. But I just thought of that. Will Rogers, what's he going to do? Transfer portal has ruined the small schools. I was talking to a group of 5 coach this year. This is in mid-November. I was talking to group of 5 coach. So group of 5, not power 5, but And I was asking him about it. And he's like, this is a guy that he'd coached in the power 5, like it'd been a big time schools. And he's like, the really tough part is we have to, and this is what you expect, right? We have to scratch and claw to raise $100,000. Like we can get out there and pound the pavement and we go raise $100,000. And then you turn around, what does $100,000 really get you? It doesn't put a roster together. $100,000 doesn't even get you a top flight quarter. I mean, really anything. So yeah, it's a major challenge. The coaches who can, if I were like a group of 5 school and I had a coach opening, I'd look for guys who'd been at that level. I'd look for guys like Kalen DeBoer, like NAIA. I'd be interested in junior college coaches though, because junior college coaches turn their roster over every 2 years anyway. Junior college coaches deal with a lot of guys who've been other places. Junior college coaches have a ton of instability. They don't get a lot of money. They don't so I would be interested in junior college coaches. If you can find one, I don't know how you find that guy. You get the advanced stats on JC guys, but that's what that would be my first kind of move. They get you a JUCO QB. Yeah, I mean that's work. Mike Leach made some JUCO QBs good. So, all right. Do we has Ryan Grubb been hired yet? It is now 12:52 Pacific time. What do we got? Anything? Any news? Oh, Pete Thamel. This is an interesting tweet from Pete Thamel. Pete Thamel says Washington will be an attractive job. He's right. Officials there for now won't have any college market competition, meaning like no other big job. Like Michigan's not open right now. Here's his quick list in no order. I'll tell you what I like here. Lance Leipold, love. But people have already tried to take it from Kansas. He hasn't left. Lance Leipold, I love. I think he's fantastic. I've met him and talked to him and his staff and been there and did a Kansas game a couple years ago before they turned the corner. And I came out of there thinking like they're going to turn the corner, and they did. Jed Fish, already mentioned Jed. I think it's a really good hire. Matt Campbell, I wouldn't have him ahead of those other 2 guys. Ryan Grubb would be great. Barry Odom, UNLV's coach, one of the best coaching jobs of the year this year in Vegas from the South. Like he was interesting because he was not a West Coast guy at all, and he worked immediately. Hit the portal hard. Chris Kleiman, yeah. Dave Clawson, I wouldn't have him ahead of some of those other guys. Kalani Sitake, I wouldn't have him ahead of some of those other guys. Kyle Whittingham is on Thamel's list. I mean, if you're Whittingham, you're going to the Big 12. You might get picked. Him or Arizona might get picked to win the Big 12 next year. So you'll have access to the playoff. Whittingham, as I understand it, was the SC job when they hired Clay Helton. They thought they were too good for Whittingham. SC was like, we're not going to hire Whittingham. But they could have. At this point, it feels a little late in the game for him. I'd be surprised if he left Utah at this point to go to Washington. If you had told me Alabama called Whittingham. They're like, interesting. I'd be surprised if Whittingham left to go to Washington. I think their list, to me, their list should be Ryan Grubb or Jed Fish. Leipold's, I think Leipold would be good too. But that'd be my list if I was them. Yeah, Jed Fish can coach, and he can recruit. Thoughts on Chris Peterson to Michigan? If when, I don't think Chris not coming back. Chris is not coming back. The portal stuff, the NIL stuff, just a lot of stuff that I don't think he wants to deal with. He does a lot of leadership training, that kind of stuff on the side now, and feels like he can, he gets his kind of need to impact leaders that way and makes an impact that way because that matters to him. So I don't think you'd see. I don't think we're seeing Chris Peters. A couple of years ago, if you'd asked me that, I would have said, "Oh, maybe," but I don't think you're seeing Chris Peterson coming back. So, all right, that's it. I love college football. Some of you like college football too, so appreciate that. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you. More Niners content coming this weekend. I guess we'll see what happens with Harbaugh. Pete Carroll. Matthew says, I don't think Pete wants the college game, but Pete does crazy stuff. Maybe Pete would do it, but he's not going to have. The problem is he wouldn't be going to. I don't think he'd be going to a blank check place. And more so than that, just NFL guys just don't want to. You don't go to college. Although you could argue that Pete was ahead of the game. Pete was in the NIL game. He knows this modern era of college football. Matt, by the way, Matt here in the chat, by the way, pink onion pizza. Google that right now. Right now, you're sitting here. Hit that like button and then Google pink onion pizza. And then just when you go to get the pizza, get some pasta, get a salad, get a little dessert item. Jimmy G's still on the menu. The ham pod pie is on the menu there. The ham pod pie is very popular. The ham pod pizza. Pink onion. I just said it because it's true. Real quick, thoughts on Caleb Williams not declaring for the draft? He's going pro. And he'll go number 1, as he should. I wouldn't think anything of it. All right, everybody. Thanks for jumping in. Appreciate you hanging for a little bit. Have a good Friday. Voice mostly held up. I promised myself I wasn't going to talk today, but I was a little self-imposed ban to protect my voice, to avoid losing it. But here we are. So thank you for jumping in. Hit that like button, and I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.